Good morning, everyone. Let me request one more time. Please switch off your microphones and your videos in favor of better bandwidth and smooth functioning of the program. Please write your question and queries in the chat box, which will be addressed at the last of the program with a live discussion with all the speakers.
Okay. Thank you, Regina. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first school webinar. Actually, currently the education and one is we call the monthly webinar. Start hold on the first Thursday of every month. So another one is we call the third Saturday afternoon. So today we are lucky. So for the monthly webinar, we have three speakers. So today we are likely to have Dr. Arun, Dr. Hossein, Mozdarani, and Dr. Mary for our. They will deliver a talk on the radiobiological concepts and the basis for radiotherapy. So let me first introduce our first speaker, Dr. Arun. Dr. Arun is the Dean and Chief of Academic Officer at the Sarasanandarajah Group of Institute. And he's the ex-senior professor and head of the Department of Radiological Physics. And he has 37 years of professional teaching experience. So I'm continue. Dr. Arun has been on many significant positions and a member to the countless committee and organizations. He the past president of the Association of Medical Physicists of India and also the past president of AFOMP, the chair of education and the training committee of AFOMP. Chairman of AFOMP Accreditation Board. He is the member of the board of directors of the International Medical Physics Certification Board. He has more than 120 publications in national and international journals and presented more than 350 papers in national and international conferences. He has been the author in 2 books. His research interests include radiation biology, experimental dosimetry in teletherapy, in radiology to see in radiology. Today, his talk is going to be the concepts of radiobiology for radiotherapy, fundamentals and current perspectives. So please, Regina, could you play his video, share the screen? Your voice, you are mute.
23. I am thankful to AFOMP for giving us this opportunity. Jin Xiangs, the chair of the ETC, contacted me and asked me, is there any possibility of having a AFOMP school webinar in March? I immediately contacted my colleague, Professor Hossein, Mozdarani, and Dr. Mary Joan, and they immediately agreed. And that is how today's AFOMP school webinar is there, where 3 talks will be there. And the first talk, I will be talking on concept of radiobiology for radiotherapy, fundamentals and current perspectives. I will be talking about it. As you very well know, little background I will give, that Globocon report 2020, which has come in 2022, has estimated more than 19 million cancer across the world, and more than 50%, if you see Asia and Oceania, that is the AFOMP region, Asia, Oceania, more than 50% of the cancers are there. And as you very well know, radiotherapy started just after the discovery of X-rays. Discovery of the X-ray took place on 8th November 1895, and Email group used these X-rays in March 1896 to treat the cancer. And then discovery of the radium and polonium and other things, they got into the treatment of cancers. So we have almost 127 years of experience, though initial period was trial and error, but in 127 years, we have learned a lot. We have come a very, very long way. If you talk about the radiotherapy facility, because radiotherapy is one of the major modalities of the cancer treatment in high-income countries, for every 120,000 patients, we have one single radiotherapy machine. But in middle-income countries, it is for 1 million. And if you low-income countries, most of the countries in Asia, Oceania region, Africa region, they fall in this category. 5 million patients, one single radiotherapy machine is there. And just to have a brief about the AFOMP countries, if you look at, we have about 11,000 medical physicists. About 70% plus are working in radiotherapy, and teletherapy units per million is average is 1.19, but as low as 0.21 teletherapy unit per million. That means for 5 million cancer patients, one radiotherapy machine is there, which is very, very less as compared to the international standards. And number of cancer patients, we have seen more than 50% in the Asia Pacific region. What do we need? Number of medical physicists, almost shortage of about 6,000. The teletherapy units also required are still, you have to double or more than that to cope up with the requirement. And if you compare with the different regions of the IOMP, you will see the number of medical physicists is 2.67 average in AFOMP region as compared to 24 or 25 medical physicists per million population in USA, Canada, and 12 in AFOMP. So we have to go a long way. Now I will come down to the today's topic, and that is the radiobiology. What is radiobiology? Radiobiology is a branch of science which combines the basic principle of physics, that the interaction of radiation with matter, and the biology, and is concerned with the action of ionizing radiation on biological tissues and the living organism. It was way back in 1906, almost about 120 years ago, Burgonian Tribundu in Paris irradiated the scrotum of the ship with the X-rays, and they observed that rapidly dividing, undifferentiated, have a long mitotic feature, are highly radiosensitive. So radiosensitivity depends upon the type of the cell, the stage of its division. And based on this thing, cell response to radiation, spermatogonia, lymphocytes are highly radiosensitive. Osteoblasts, spermatogonia, there are medium radiosensitive, and nerve cells, which are completely differentiated, are radio-resistant. Similarly, the cells are dividing, and they are into different phases, different cycles of the division, and the sensitivity depends upon the cycle of the cell division. And the G1 phase, in which cell grow and becomes mature. S phase is a synthetic phase in which DNA is synthesized, very active phase. G2 phase is which cell division occurs. And the M phase, mitotic, is which mitotic division occurs, and it is the most sensitive. And you can see mitotic M phase is the most sensitive to ionizing radiation, and G1 is the more resistant, S phase is less resistance, G2 phase is sensitive. So M and G2 are the phases. If you track or irradiate the cells in this M phase or D2 phase, you will get more effect of radiation of this thing. And here graphically also you can see that relative survivability of this thing in the M phase, there are more killing, so survivability is much less. G1 phase resistance, so survivability is much higher. Now, when radiation interacts with the matter or with the cell, it is how a direct or indirect effect we get it. Direct effect is one when radiation directly hits the DNA or the chromosome break and the nucleus damage and ends up into a damage that is a direct route. Mostly the particulate radiation, the effect is a direct route. Indirect route is where radiation interacts with the water molecule into the cell, almost 60 to 70% of the water. They create the free radical, and these free radicals take into the chemical reaction, and then they create a damage. This is called as indirect route. X-ray and gamma ray, almost the 90% plus effect is indirect route. But for the particulate, it is almost a direct route. And in case of the indirect effect, OH radicals are very important. They are the things, and therefore presence of oxic cells and anoxic cells, they have different sensitivity to radiation. When I told radiobiology, physical as well as biology, instead of the X-rays, physical process, it is 10 to minus 15 seconds. So that creates the fast electron. And these electrons, they produce ion radicals within 10 to minus 10 seconds. Then the chemical reaction with the free radical, chemical changes and the breaking of the bond, and the biological process starts. This biological process can continue for a day, week, or even month. It can be decelerated or it can be accelerated by using the radio protectors or radio sensitizers or modulator. So X-ray photon, fast electron, ion radical, free radical, chemical change, all this takes well into 10 to minus 6 seconds, and the biological process or biological effect is second. When the radiation interacts with the cell, there are three possibilities. One is that it completely, it's a lethal effect, that the cell death occurs. There is no chance of repair or something, but there can be a sublethal damage, and that sublethal damage gets either completely repaired and the cell survives as a normal as earlier, or it has a mutation as an atypical cell. So damage can be lethal or sublethal. Sublethal, it may recur completely and work as this thing. Now you to understand three very important things, parameters into radiation biology, and that is, one is LET, linear energy transfer. When the radiation, ionizing radiation enters into the cell or with the matter, whatever you call, the linear energy, the amount of energy going on depositing when it transfers. RBE, radiobiological effectiveness, and OER, oxygen enhancement ratio. I will explain one by one in bit detail. So LET is a linear energy transfer, and it is measured into keV per micrometer, the amount of energy deposited when it enters and transfers 1 micrometer. Now alpha particle, they deposit very large energy in a very small area or the length they travel in, and therefore they are high LET radiation. X-rays or photons, which do not have mass or charge, they can penetrate, they can go on depositing very less energy, less keV per micrometer, so they are called as low LET radiation. So low LET radiations are gamma rays, X-rays. High LET radiations are alpha particle, ions of heavy nuclei, low energy neutron, which deposits energy in a very, very short distance. Impact is very, very high, LET. Now, what is RBE? Relative biological effectiveness. Every kind of radiation has a different effect on the one kind of cell, and that is what relative capabilities of the radiation with the differing LETs to produce particular biological response. And how it is measured? It is measured as RBE, dose in gray from 250 kVp X-rays divided by dose in gray of a test radiation required to create similar kind of effect, similar kind of damage. For example, dose of X-ray required is say 10 gray, and if dose of alpha particle required is say for example 4 gray, so 10 upon 4 gray, RBE is 2.5. So this way we have for proton, for the neutron, for the alpha particles, for the carbon particles, different RBE. And now we'll see it here also from the cell line survival curve that the dose required by the X-ray and dose required by the particle to produce similar kind of effect. If you see here by X-ray, a large dose is required as compared to the particle, and therefore the RBE is equal to dose required by the X-rays divided by dose required by the particle to produce similar kind of biological effect. Now, what is the relation between LET and RBE? As LET increases, RBE increases. X-ray and gamma rays, LET is very, very less. RBE is taken as 1. As a proton, they are charged particle, have mass. RBE is taken as 1.1. For carbon particle, it is around 3 plus. So similarly, you can see high LET radiation, more RBE, more effectiveness. Now, I talked about the free radical formation, mostly in the indirect effect of radiation, and there oxygen plays a great and big role. Now, this OER quantifies the effect of the ionizing radiation compares with the LET. And this is the oxygen enhancement ratio, the ratio of the radiation dose required to cause a particular biological response of cells of the organism in an oxygen deprived environment to the radiation dose required to cause an identical response under normal oxygenated conditions. And you see that for X-rays and photon, as it is almost 90% plus is the indirect effect, oxygen plays a great role, and OER for X-ray and gamma radiation is almost of the order of 3. But as you move on to the particles, where mostly it is a direct effect, no free radical formation, and therefore oxygen has no role to play there. So as LET increases, OER come down. For X and gamma rays, OER is 3. As LET increases, that is we move from to particles to proton, carbon, or this thing, OER almost approaches 1. That means oxygen is present or not present. Effect will be the same with the high LET radiation. In 127 years, we have seen a great progress into radiotherapy on clinical advances, technological advances, and biological advances, understanding biology of a cancer, understanding radiobiology, the radiation interaction effect and all. And you see, since 1960, just I mentioned radiosensitive Bergonian Sibundu, and then in 1923, radiosensitive correlated with the oxygen presence. There is a OER effect, we got it. Nobel Prize for Muller for radiation-induced in Drosophila mutagenesis. It has been found the importance of oxygen was shown. I like that the continuously understanding of the biology underlying the radiotherapy, the cancer is known, and you can can see we are becoming more and more wiser and more knowledgeable, and then we are using this experience and knowledge to treat in a better way, and we have moved from a physical dose to a biological dose. Earlier, it was a homogeneous dose distribution, but now we are creating the hotspot. Earlier, it was an ISO dose. Now it is an ISO-ERD. Earlier, it was the IGRT, image-guided radiotherapy. Now it is a BGRT, biologically guided radiotherapy. As we move ahead, I will explain this thing. So we have come a long way in understanding radiobiology of the cancer treatment. The primary aim of radiotherapy is to deliver lethal dose to the tumor and spare normal tissue or OAR. We want a differential effect, lethality into the tumor cell, at the same time sparing of the normal tissue and OAR. How to achieve this? It's an art, it's a science, and by knowledge and skill we can achieve, and we have done that thing. And as you see that from earlier days, the radiotherapy tumor control probability was hardly 20%. Now we have reached to 80 to 90% tumor control probability for survival we have done. Now, another factor is the tumor and normal tissue, as I talked about, is different because the mitotic phase and sensitivity and 4 R's, which I will talk about, and what is very important is a therapeutic ratio, that radiation dose on the x-axis and incidence of the effect or lethality or the damage. You see the tumor control and the normal tissue. By the time we produce around 10% damage into the normal tissue, we have more than 60. And this we can, different technology, different fractionation schedule, we can increase, widen this gap, and you can see that we can keep the morbidity, complications in the normal tissue into the OAR much less manageable level. At the same time, we have tumor control probability of the order of 90-95% with different techniques like the 3D CRT, IMRT, IGRT, SRS, all techniques. As we go ahead, we will understand this thing. Very basic and fundamental are 4 R's of fractionation. The radiotherapy is not given in a single fraction, multiple fraction, different fractionation schedules we are using, and how radiobiology works into that thing. And these radiological mechanisms that impact the response to fractionation radiotherapy are repair. That is, I told you, there's a lethal and sublethal damage. Sublethal damage gets repaired during the course of the time, and spares late responding normal tissue preferentially. Then we have a redistribution of the cells, migration of the cells from the other area to the damage or radiation area, and there the tumor damage increases, but at the same time normal tissue by redistribution of the cell cycle can get repopulation. It spares acute responding normal tissues, no effect on the late effect, and danger of the tumor repopulation is there if the treatment is too long, because most of the tumor, the repopulation or the kickoff time is of the order of 3 to 4 weeks. In some, it is 7 or 8 weeks slow growing tumors like a breast or prostate. So, and then another is a reoxygenation, because we have to see that the cells which are in the center, less blood supply, less oxygen supply, they become oxygenated next day after 1 fraction, 2 fraction. And these all processes, 4 are repair, reoxygenation, redistribution, repair. Repair starts within few hours of the radiation, but redistribution takes little longer reoxygen. But repopulation, as I told you, it takes 3 to 4 weeks minimum, and then it can be longer in slow tumors also. So 4 R's of radiotherapy influence on time between the fraction, T, overall treatment time, and accordingly we space our schedules of the treatment, which I'll talk different fractionation schedule based on this fundamental 4 hours of the radiotherapy. We cannot achieve all at once, and therefore we have to optimization of the schedule for individual circumstances. And today what we call is a tailor-made treatment depending upon the site, stage, age, all those factors. We tailor-made our treatment. And then again, a fractionation, if you see here, the doses, it is not the total dose delivered, it's a dose delivered into how many fraction, what is the size of the fraction, what is the treatment. Here you can see 2 gray, 2 gray, 2 gray. You have given 6 fraction, the damage occurred is this with iso effect. But if I give it a single fraction, the damage produced will be 2 to 4, 4.8 gray single fraction is equivalent to 2 into this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 12 gray given into 6 fraction, 2 gray per fraction is equivalent to 4.8 gray. Similarly, you can find out here 4 gray, 4 gray, 4 gray. There is a 4 gray into 3 fraction is equivalent to single dose of 6 gray. So these the iso dose or the cell line, you can get the equivalent doses were changing from one fractionation schedule to another fractionation schedule. Depending upon these, we have conventional fractionation schedule where daily doses are 1.8 to 2 gray. Dose per week is 9 to 10, and total dose you can have 40 to 70, depending upon the size of the tumor, the field size you are using, the site, and so many things. Then we have a hyperfractionation, more than 1 fraction in a day, and that you have a dose of 1.8. You can have 2 fraction, 3 fraction, 4 fraction in a day, but the gap between the consecutive fraction should be minimum of 6 hours. That is very, very important. And then we have an accelerated fractionation where shorter overall time, more fraction per day of a larger doses are given. Then we have a hypofractionation where larger than 2.2 gray dose in a less number of fractions are given, and it depends upon alpha by beta. I will discuss, and in which cases we can use the hypofractionation. Also, hypofractionation has been divided into 2 categories, I will tell, and this is where you can schematically you can see it here. Conventional fractionation, 7-week treatment. Hyperfractionation, also the duration of the total treatment is same, but you are giving more number of fractions per day, more number of fractions in a week, but the dose per fraction is less. And accelerated fractionation, the total duration of the time has been reduced very less, and moderately accelerated, where you can initially give 5 fraction and then you can increase to then afterwards. Now, it depends upon, say for example, conventional, typical number of fractional this. What does it do? Spare early normal tissue reaction, allow reoxygenation and reassortment in the tumor, where you have alpha by beta, which I will introduce in few minutes, is more than 10, you can use this thing. But if you have, for example, the hypofractionation or SRT or SBRT, where you are using large dose per fraction, it can be 4 to 6 gray per fraction, even 8 gray more fraction, and the number of fractions are much less. What it does, it reduces the treatment time, so no repopulation, nothing. But where alpha by beta is less, for example, in prostate, where alpha by beta is 1.8 to 2, this extreme hypofractionation is very, very helpful. And I was just talking about, we have hypofractionation, you have moderate hypofractionation where 2.4 to 4 gray per fraction, 15 to 30 fractions are given, and extreme hypofractionation, that is SRS, SRT or SBRT, we are increasing 6.5 to 10 gray per fraction, 4 to 7 fraction. And then radiobiologically, again, here you can see that tumor fractionation sensitivity is low when alpha beta ratio of cancer higher than that of the late responding healthy tissue. For example, cancer cervix, cancer head and neck, alpha beta is around 10, and the late responding healthy tissues, the alpha beta is 3, 4, or 5. There it works. But for breast cancer, where alpha beta for a tumor is around 4 to 5, and it is close to your late reacting tissue, moderate to high hypofractionation you can give it. And for CA prostate, where alpha beta ratio of the cancer, of the tumor, is less than the late responding tissue. Here is 1.5 to 1.8 or 2 alpha beta for the prostate is much lesser than the 3 or 4 of the late reacting normal tissues, and their extreme hypofractionation is very important, and it gives better result, and you have a lot of references given. I will not go into details of that. Now, how to compare radiobiologically the different fractionation schedules, the effects and all those things, or you are moving from one fractionation schedule to another fractionation schedule, or in between you add on or boost the things, and there was a need to optimize fractionation schedule for individual circumstances and parameter which play a big role. What is the total dose? What is the dose per fraction? Time between the fraction and total treatment time. They govern the final outcome, the tumor control probability, as well as normal tissue completion probability. So all these 4 factors, they interplay, and therefore the radiobiological models have been proposed, and they are being used since long. I will not go into details of the earlier model, but Stanskis was the first in 1944, which has shown that the log dose, log time, and then it is converted into actually the effect and total dose, that overall treatment time equivalent to biological effect for a cancer and the normal tissue, they were different. And these data was used by Cohen, Reisner, and Quimby, and they proposed the radiobiological empirical models like NSD, CRE, and TDF. They were used earlier, but now we have a very robust, a lot of factors we know about being well used. There's a linear quadratic model very widely used nowadays. This model was originally proposed by Keller and Rosie in 1972, and then Berenson applied this thing to radiotherapy, and LQ model, linear quadratic. Now you'll see here, effect is alpha D plus beta D square. First term is a linear, second term is a quadratic. Now where alpha and beta are tissue-specific concept, and therefore the shortcoming of NSD, CRE, or TDF are taken away. Here you have alpha by beta, very specific. For example, you are going to get what is a mucosal reaction, what is a radiation proctitis, or you want to see squamous cell carcinoma, or a cancer of head and neck, cancer of prostate, cancer of cervix. Alpha by betas will be different, and you can specifically use into these formulas and find out what is the biological effectiveness of those fractionation schedules. We do not want to know individual alpha by beta values, but alpha by beta ratio. And now we have got data, a lot of publication in the literature. They give alpha by beta values for early reaction, late reaction, for different kind of tumor, different kind of endpoints. And then this Berenson modified this formula by just taking alpha by beta. This is a mathematical jugglery. I will not go into this thing. What we need to remember is the final formula, and that is extrapolated tolerance dose, ETD, or extrapolated response dose, ERD, or biological effectiveness bed BED, very widely used, either ERD or BED, biological effective dose. What is the effectiveness of a given dose fraction? And that ERD is equal to N number of fraction. The dose per fraction alpha by beta is specific to the type of the tissue, type of the end, and then generally for acute epithelial tissue, normal tissue reaction, alpha by beta is 8 to 13, average is taken as 10. Late tissue reaction, it is alpha by beta is 2 to 6. Tumor, different kind of tumor, I will not excluding breast and the prostate. Breast is around 4 to 5 alpha by beta, and the prostate is 1.5 to 2. Other tumors 10 to 25. Now values are available. Now just one example I will give you how to calculate this ERD, extrapolated response dose, or biological. They are all similar. BED is here. If, for example, you are giving 2 fractions per 2 gray per fraction, 5 fractions per week to 60 gray. So what I will put N is 30, 2 gray per fraction to alpha by beta. For a tumor, I have taken 10, and I get ERD for tumor as 72. Now, if I am going to compare the late reaction with the same amount of dose and fractionation, 30 fractions of 2 gray, and if I choose the late effect alpha by beta as 2.5, I will get the ERD or BED or ETD value of 108 for late reaction, 72 for tumor. So similarly, ERD for acute normal damage, if I take alpha by beta 8, the value is this. Now, how are we going to use this values, and what is the relevance of that thing? Now, for example, one example I am giving it here. What is the equivalent dose with 3 gray per fraction, 5 fraction week? I am shifting from 2 gray per fraction to 3 gray per fraction. So for standard treatment, ERD late effect, if I consider, it is 108. My aim is late effect should not be more than into this fractionation schedule, my end point. Then I just take 108 to keep the dose tolerance limit. Then the ERD is 108, and I don't know. Dose per fraction is 3, and then alpha by beta is 2.5, and you will see this calculation. 16 fraction of 3 gray. That is 16 fraction into 3 gray, 48 gray is equivalent to 30 fractions of 2 gray, 60 gray. So this is how. Another example I will give. Similarly, 10 gray single fraction will be equivalent to how much? 28 gray per of 2 gray per fraction. How it I just found out? ERD late, I'm going to say 1 fraction of 10 gray with 2.5, I get 50 gray. Now, to get this 50 gray late effect with 2 gray per fractionation, how much is required? 50, and the number of fractions required will be 40. So 28 gray given in 2 fractions, 2 gray per fraction is equivalent to 10 gray single dose. Then gave ERD equation for 2, 3, 4 fractions per day, and this is X hours as the interfraction period, and mu is a repair constant during the fraction, the time the repair takes place, and that mu repair 0.46, 0.9, different values they are available, and then you can find out the ERD for 3 fractions per day, 4 fractions per day, and then similarly ERD for brachytherapy, that is a continuous treatment ERD. It is not a fractionated HDR, it's LDR. You can get this, the R is a dose in gray per hour, treatment time, and mu is your repair constant. If you put it, you get. So this all formulations are there, they can be used. And then again, because the repopulation is a very, very important thing. If the treatment is too long, maybe 6 or 7 weeks, for example, cervix or head and neck, then the repopulation kickoff time is of 28 days or 25 days. You can take into account, and therefore Travis and Tucker introduced time constant, because during the treatment is too long, the repopulation will start and get kick off, and therefore they have given with time constant ERD at the end of that treatment schedule will be n number of fraction alpha d plus this t minus tk. T is the total treatment time. Maybe, for example, 7 weeks you have taken, so 40 days. TK is 28 days, whatever, or 21 days, depends upon. If it is a prostate, it is 60 to 70 or even 80 days. So this will not apply there. So with this thing, TK is a kick-off time of the proliferation. Now, as I mentioned, BED, ETD, and ERD are the same. They are biologically effective dose. The mathematical formula is the same. Applied to all types of biological effect on all types of tissue, including normal, early, late, you can do, and you can prepare your own charts choosing these values for 2 gray, alpha by beta, 3 gray, 4 gray, and with this fractionation, dose per fraction, you can just choose by as you using TDF tables where there, that way you can use. So radiobiological basis of fractionation is that large dose per fraction. That is what we talked about, the hypofractionation, increase the RT effect. Large dose per fraction, more toxic to the tumor with low by alpha by beta ratio compared to tumors with high alpha by beta ratio. Therefore, hypofraction is suitable when alpha by beta is less, for example, breast cancer, the prostate cancers. Again, small dose per fraction, protects tumors with low alpha by beta. It is not good for the prostate and the breast, but it will be helpful in cervix and other where alpha by beta ratio is large. Similarly, it is not the size of the tumor. Many times we see T4 melts like anything, we get complete response. And many times we see T2, small tumor, it has a residue. Why it is so? Because there are many biological factors, there are many components which determines the tumor cure, heterogeneity, biological, intrinsic radiosensitivity is very important, like 4R, this is the 5th R is the intrinsic radiosensitivity, proliferation potential, pro-apoptic tendency, apoptosis is very important. Repair T-half, fast and slow repair, how fast it takes. Rate of repopulation, redistribution, and the oncogenes of these things. I will not go into details of this thing, but it is not just the tumor size, but the proliferation rate. The cells are multiplying, cancer cell, and this renewing stem cell, how much they end up into the stem cell and the non-stem cell. More the stem cell they are ending, and we are not able to completely lethal dose or kill this stem cell. They will again recur and residue will come. They will not end up into the complete. And here you can see it again, the chronological number, the stem cell in cancer stem cell. If the number is 10⁻⁹, the dose even of 65 or 70 gray, you will get almost 90 to 100% response. But the number of chronological cells are 10⁻⁻, even the 70 gray is not sufficient. For 10⁻⁻, you can see 70 gray only will be able to give 10%. So number of chronological cells is a determining factor into these things. Hypoxia, we talked about, number of papers have been published, small hypoxic tumor fraction, you can see tumor control probability at the end of 2 years is almost 80%. But there are hypoxic cells, and then it is just 40% of what we achieved, what we got for the much more oxygenated cells. Similarly, the tumor, the disease-free survival at the end of 6 or 7 years, you will see if oxygen supply, they are oxic and this thing, the response is very good. And here, similarly, angiogenesis, I told you the apoptosis, angiogenesis is also one of the very, very important thing. And these tumor are more vascular. There's a relationship between the microvascular density and the probability of metastasis, relapse-free survival, and the prognosis, and that is called angiogenesis technique. If a vascularization number you can see increases, the metastasis increases, the failure of the treatment or a relapse is much higher. Now I will just introduce precision radiation oncology, where the imaging modalities are giving us not just the physical shape, size of the tumor, other thing, but the biology of the tumor, biology of the cancer. And therefore, in precision medicine oncology, it is technologically driven precision as well as the biologically driven precision radiation oncology. And then by quantitative imaging like PET-CT, MRI, and other protocol, and radiogenomics, the radiomics, all these things can be used and making possible to predict, diagnose, treat disease more precisely, more personally than ever. So these imaging, and that is what shift from the image guided to biologically guided radiotherapy has happened. So we are integrating radiation technologies, imaging technologies, and tumor biology into our clinic, and integrating all these imaging, understanding the biology of the tumor using that thing we can do. So first thing in being able to deliver precision radiotherapy is accurate target delineation during the radiotherapy planning process, and the computed tomography, 18 FDG, PET scan, PET-CT, MRI, 3D, 4D imaging that have given us, including this MRI, the greater understanding of tumor biology, the concept of biological target volume within the tumor, we know, and within the tumor, we create a hotspot, create a field into field ball, and then by understanding metabolic, biochemical, physiological, and functional changes within the tumor, you can target, biologically target with radiotherapy, and you can achieve much better tumor control rate with a lesser side effects. And this functional imaging gives you lot of information about hypoxia, vascularity, cellular proliferation, which are determinant of the tumor control probability to the radiotherapy, and they impact the radiotherapy. So imaging biomarkers are very, very important, and it is not just the GTV entire. We can see here area of hypoxic by PET studies we can do, area of high tumor burden FDG. So they need more aggressive dose, ablating these things, and therefore within this thing you create a hotspot and treat. So target volume definitions and the concept of biological target volume, we have got the idea. And this was given long ago in 2000 itself by Sealing, who was into Sloan Kettering, biological target volume concept of those things. And he talked about, and now we have got all these imaging modalities, the hybrid imaging, fusion imaging. We get a lot of idea about this thing, and we are using into the clinic. So functional technology provides identify subvolumes of the tumor in the areas of reduced resistance, the biological target volume, and receive an extra dose of radiation with high precision without increasing the dose to the whole tumor. So we use these modalities in planning, delivery, and evaluation. And we have now, this has not yet FDA approved, but soon it will be, biologically guided radiotherapy PET LINAC system. You have a positron emission tomography, and then the LINAC in one machine, and then biologically guided radiotherapy we are giving. Just 2 minutes I will take about radiobiological particle therapy. I talked about, and this is a man who gave us, Robert Wilson, proposed that proton can be used clinically. Advantage is that you can see LET and RBE. As LET increases, the RBE increases, and we can use the high LET radiation to get a better radiobiological effectiveness with a less physical dose. And here you can see oxygen enhancement ratio, how it plays for X-rays, hypoxic and well oxygenated. The response gap is huge, but if you move to alpha particle, this gap is not there. So tumors which are anoxic, where blood supply is not there, can be treated by the particulate radiation where the X-rays or gamma rays fail. And again, you can see it, VR, as LET increases, the VR effect comes to almost 1 independent. And this is how particle therapy by Bragg peak, you can deliver a very large doses. And we have a lot of things, and you can see here from earlier, just the X-ray high kV, 200 kV X-ray, we used to give only 240 gray. Now we can, with the carbon and other things, 100 gray ablative dose, very confined to the tumor, and that will give you better. Here again, example of the protons, photons, and IMRT, how protons give and spare the normal cochlea here. You can see that thing. With this thing, I end up my talk. I thank you all for your patience hearing, and any questions or queries are there, they will be taken at the end of the after the lecture. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So it was a very informative lecture. So question and queries related to this lecture can be addressed again. Now our next speaker is Dr. Hossein Mozdarani. So let me introduce him. So Dr. Hossein Mozdarani is full-time professor of medical genetics and University Radiological Safety Officer, Department of Medical Genetics, Faculty of Medical Sciences, Tarbet Moderator University, Tehran, Iran, since from 2000. He has teaching experience at postgraduate and undergraduate level for over 30 years. He's a direct supervisor for 35 PhD students, for 140 MSc students. He's author and editor and translator for more than 25 academic books. He's author and co-author for over 350 pages published in well-reputed peer-reviewed journals, about 300 presentations at scientific meetings with more than 70 invited talks. He has worked in 20 research projects and awarded with 18 awards, which include 7 national and international research festivals, 6 at university level, 2 for best book authorship, 2 for best translating books, and 1 for AFOMP outstanding medical physicist. He's a board member of 3 scientific societies. He's a founder, editor, and editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Radiation Research for 20 years. He's a scientific committee member of International Organization for Medical Physics, AFOMP, since from 2009. He's an editorial board member of over 10 national and international journals, and he has been being scientific secretary for 4 congresses and seminars, and he's a reviewer of several scientific journals, organizing committee member and scientific committee member of over 30 congresses. Okay. Okay. Reviewer to wear scientific journals, organizing committee member and scientific committee member of over 30 congresses based on his professional and proposal and persuade. MSc courses in radiation biology was established at several medical university in Iran. He's a founder of the Department of Medical Genetics at the Tarbiyat Madrasa University, and also a founder and co-founder for genetics, cytogenetics, and radiobiology lab at different institutions. So Dr. Hossein Mozdarani, welcome to our program. So we are lucky to have you. So Dr. Mozdarani is with us. There is no worries, but we are going to play his recorded video presentation so that there won't be any problem in between. Is that okay, Dr. Mozdarani?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for your introduction. And please go ahead. Thank you.
Yes. So we are going to now play the recorded presentation. And if any question and queries you have, please write it in the chat box. All the question and queries will be addressed at the last of the program. And Dr. Mozdarani will be with us for the whole program. And let me request all the participants to please switch off their videos and mics in favor of smooth functioning of the program. So let's see the recorded presentation.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for participating and joining us to this school webinar. My name is Hossein Mozdarani. I am a radiobiologist and medical geneticist from Tarbiyat Madrasa University in Tehran, Iran. I would like to thank Professor Arun Chougule for organizing this school webinar and Dr. Joan for moderating this session. I am very glad to be part of this event. My talk is about radiobiology of external beam radiotherapy, which is a very popular modality for cancer treatment. We know all about various applications of radiation in modern life. For example, using in research, in industry, and the main application of radiation is in medicine for imaging purposes. One of the main areas that we deal with ionizing radiation is in radiotherapy of cancer. There are two types of ionizing radiation, electromagnetic and particulate. Although in the electromagnetic spectrum, there are non-ionizing radiation such as visible light, radiant heat, and radio waves. However, X and gamma rays have the same nature, but they have shorter wavelengths and consequently carry a larger photon energy. As a result, X and gamma rays can break chemical bonds and produce biological effects. Other types of radiation that occur in nature and that are also used experimentally are electrons, protons, alpha particles, neutrons, negative pi mesons, and heavy charge ions, alpha particles, beta particles, as well as gamma rays are produced by radioactive materials, but other heavy nuclear elements are produced by cyclotrons or accelerators. The nature of biological effects of ionizing radiation is different from other types of energy. For example, a total body dose of about 4 gray of X-rays given to a human is lethal in about half of the individuals exposed to radiation. This does represent absorption of energy of only about 67 calories. Assuming the person to be a standard man weighing 7 kilograms. The smallness of the amount of energy involved can be illustrated in many ways. Converted to heat, it would represent a temperature rise of 0.002 degrees centigrade, which we do not harm at all. The same amount of energy in the form of heat is absorbed in drinking with only 1 sip of warm coffee. Therefore, energy impartation of ionizing radiation differs from other types of energy deposition. Energy deposition of ionizing radiation is a random process in nature and depends on the LET of the radiation or linear energy transfer. For sparsely ionizing radiation such as X or gamma rays, ionization events are random, discrete and far from each other, but for high LET particulate radiation, ionizing events are dense and non-random in biomolecules, producing more biological effects. This slide shows how DNA molecule is damaged directly or indirectly. In direct effect, energy deposition is done locally, which lead to strand breaks. This is a dominant process for high LET radiation, such as alpha particles. In indirect effect, energy is absorbed in water molecules that consist about 75% of cellular environment, producing free radicals that binds to DNA and leads to DNA damage. This is a dominant process for low LET radiation, such as X and gamma rays. The reason for using radiation for treatment is its potential for inducing biological effects. Ionizing radiation damage cells are molecules by energy deposition. However, for X and gamma rays, the nature of energy deposition is random. Therefore, induction of biological effects is random too. It is a random process because energy deposition might not turn into damage, or a damage may be repaired, etc. The first target for biological effects of radiation is DNA. Various types of DNA damage are induced at high number even after exposure to 1 gray. For example, after exposure to 1 gray, we have about 1,000 base damages, nucleated damages, about 1,000 single strand breaks, and about 50 double strand breaks. From these DNA damages, double strand break is considered as a lethal damage if left unrepaired. After induction of double strand breaks, many genes are involved to repair in this damage, double strand break damage. DNA damage undergoes different types of repair system. All the genes involved in repair try to maintain genome stability. Damaged DNA might be repaired completely, leading to normal phenotype. Damage might be left unrepaired, which lead to cell death. Damage might be repaired in an error-prone process, leading to gene mutation, but allow cells to survive. If repair of DNA damage was unsuccessful, cells undergo to apoptosis pathway for programmed cell death. Either repair of damage or undergoing cells into apoptotic process helps cells to maintain their genome stability. Otherwise, cells from genome instability, such as gene mutation, microsatellite instability, cell cycle perturbances, chromosomal abnormalities, which may lead to cell death. Therefore, cell fades after irradiation is cell death, either in apoptotic form or mitotic death or other cellular transformation, depending on the cell type. For example, lymphocytes are susceptible to apoptosis and fibroblasts are susceptible to mitotic death. The cell-killing effect of ionizing radiation was the main reason for using it in radiotherapy. However, as it kills tumor cells, it also has killing effect on normal tissue as well. And this slide shows a brief history of introduction of radiation, use of radiation in cancer treatment. It was only 1 year after discovery of X-ray that it was used to treat breast cancer patient. In 1898, Curies reported the physiologic effect of radium rays. By the first years of the new century, 20th century, skin cancers were the most frequent treated because of the low penetration of radiation in tissue at that time. During the time being, scientists began to understand the nature of radiations, their modalities of actions, and the relationship between time and dose of radiation on cell survival in vitro and in vivo. It was only by 1920s that the physicians understood that how the administration of the total radiation dose in fractionated ones was better than a singular treatment session regarding cancer control and fewer side effects. The period from 1930 to 1950 was characterized by continuing scientifically progress to treat patients affected by deep cancer. This era, also known as orthovoltage era. The studies during successive 3 decades or megavoltage era were also focused on the development of more and more innovative radiotherapeutic devices able to treat cancer in the deep tissues. This period saw the introduction of the cobalt teletherapy, producing high energy gamma rays, and of more potent electron linear accelerators known as LINACs, able to deliver megavoltage X-rays. In radiotherapy, we have 2 types of cell components that are exposed to radiation, normal tissue and tumor tissue. Response of normal tissue is predictable because we know the parameters affecting normal tissue response to radiation, such as cell type, whether fully differentiated, or tissues containing cycling cells such as stem cell or self-renewal cells, oxygen level, repair capacity, radiation quality, etc. This slide shows the effects of radiation quality on cell survival. This is, for example, for alpha particle with a survival curve with no shoulder and a steep linear component, and for low LT radiation with a big shoulder and linear component. And this shows the oxygen effect on normal tissue, that we call it oxygen enhancement ratio. We therefore, based on cellular response to radiation, we categorize tissues as highly radiosensitive, such as lymphoid, bone marrow cells, gastrointestinal epithelium, gonads, embryonic tissues. Moderately radiosensitive cells, such as skin, vascular endothelium, lung, kidney, liver, eye lens, and thyroid in children, and least radiosensitive tissues such as central nervous system, muscle, bone and cartilage, connective tissue. Although the least radiosensitive tissue, also radioresistant, is less capable of cell renewal than highly sensitive tissue. The situation is different for tumors because there are different cell types, cells responding to radiation. For example, oxygenated cells, which are radiosensitive, hypoxic cells, which are radioresistant, and a great part of the tumor is consisting of necrotic cells. As the tumor grows, the necrotic core of the tumor grows, but the thickness of viable proliferating cells is only about 200 micrometer and 1 or 2 layers of hypoxic cells. The aim of radiotherapy is either radical treatment of tumors or palliative therapy. For radical radiotherapy, we need to have therapeutic gain factor defined by the effect of radiation on the tumor cells should be more than the effect of radiation on normal cells, or therapeutic ratio can be defined as tumor control probability, TCP, should be greater than normal tissue complication probability, NTCP. It was found that fractionated radiation is better for tumor control over the single radiation dose. So fractionation is in routine use in radiotherapy. However, several events would take place in tumor following each fractionated dose. The most important of them are the five R's of dose fractionation, which is called repair, repopulation, redistribution, reoxygenation, and radiosensitivity. Repair takes place for sublethal damages. DNA damage is recognized by various sensing mechanisms. Based on the type of damage, different repair mechanisms operate to restore the damaged site. For base damage and single-strand breaks, excision repair mechanism operates and will repair about 90% of damage within 10 minutes to 1 hour. For double-strand breaks, recombinational repair operates to repair this type of damage. It needs about 2 to 4 hours time to repair in an error-free or error-prone path phase. So normal tissue have more time to repair themselves as they are mainly consisting of non-proliferating cells. Repair between fractions should be completed. We are dealing with tissue recovery rather than DNA repair. A correlation of incomplete repair is possible. In general, the time between fractions for most tissues should be more than 6 hours. Some tissues, such as central nervous system, recover slowly. Another event is repopulation. The lag time to regeneration varies with the tissue type. In acute responding tissue, regeneration has a considerable sparing effect. In human mucosa, regeneration starts 10 to 12 days into a 2 gray fraction protocol and increases tissue tolerance by at least 1 gray per day. Prolonging treatment time has a sparing effect. As treatment time is reduced, acute responding tissues become dose limiting. In late responding tissues, prolonging overall treatment time beyond 6 weeks has little effect, but prolonging time to retreatment may increase tissue tolerance. Normally cycling cells are at different phases of the cell cycle. Each phase has its own time lapse and radiosensitivity. Cells in the mitosis and G2 phase of the cell cycle are radiosensitive, whereas cells in the S phase are radioresistant. Fractionated irradiation induces 2 major effects on the cell population. One, blocking cells in the G2 radiosensitive phase and allowing cells to redistribute and enter into the radiosensitive phase. The major event that takes place in fractionation is reoxygenation. Generally, tumors consist of aerated, fully oxygenated cells and hypoxic with low oxygen level cells and anoxic with no oxygen cells. When it is exposed to low LET radiation in different fraction, aerated cells are killed. In the first dose, hypoxic cells are less damaged and anoxic cells become necrotic, inactivated. Then the hypoxic cells are reoxygenated or aerated either by increased blood supply or by oxygen diffusion. The reoxygenated hypoxic cells become radiosensitive and are killed during the next fraction. This process is called reoxygenation. Tumors have different radiosensitivity. Radiosensitive tumors or normal tissue is also influenced by many other factors such as LAT, dose rate, oxygen concentration, cell cycle status, repair, and etc. To make benefits from biological response of tumors in fractionated radiotherapy, different types of fractionations can be used. We have conventional fractionation with daily doses of 1.8 to 2 gray. Hyperfractionation, the number of fraction is increased, time is kept the same. Dose per fraction is less than 1.8 gray. Rationale for this type of fractionation is to spare late responding tissues. We have accelerated fractionation, shorter overall treatment time. Dose per fraction is about 1.8 to 2 gray. Rationale for this type of fractionation is overcome accelerated tumor repopulation, and we have hypofractionation. Dose per fractionation is higher than 2.2 gray per day per fraction. Reduce total number of fractions. Rationale for this, for using this type of fractionation is tumor has low alpha beta ratio and there is no therapeutic advantage to be gained with respect to late complications. Apart from the above mentioned events after fractionation, other important biological phenomena occur in cells after irradiation because of the genome instability. These events are either adaptive response or bystander effect. Bystander effect which disregards the target theory, that is the heated cell might not be damaged, but the neighboring unheated cell may be damaged, and radio adaptation, which leads to radio resistance at higher doses. These biological responses intervene in radiotherapy outcome of tumors. Genome instability is the key player in various biological phenomena that occur in tumor environment after irradiation. To spare normal tissues and directing radiation to tumors, different treatment modalities are in use in routine clinical setting. We have different modalities such as stereotactic body radiotherapy, intensity modulated radiation therapy, image-guided radiation therapy, intraoperative radiation therapy, and using particulate radiation. We also use different types of planning, for example, 2-dimensional, 3 or 4-dimensional planning for better therapeutic efficacy. However, In spite of all these efforts in external photon beam radiotherapy, still in many cases, conventional radiotherapy is not working because of the presence of hypoxic and cancerous stem cells in tumors that resist to the conventional regimens used in routine radiotherapy. To overcome hypoxia problem, different measures were undertaken. For example, use of high pressure oxygen administered to patients, which was not tolerable for patients. Design of chemical radiosynthesizers that similar to ionizing radiation kills irritated tumor cells with no effect to hypoxic cells. Also, we have a few chemicals that can radiosynthesize hypoxic cells, but are not in clinical routine use. And the third one, use of high LET radiation was proposed to overcome hypoxia problem in tumors. Particle therapy using beams of neutrons, protons, or heavy ions is sometimes referred to as hardened therapy, that is therapy with particles that are made of quarks. Hardened therapy might be the solution for effective radiotherapy of cancer. Neutrons were first used for cancer therapy at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory in California in the 1930s. The interest was renewed at Hammersmith Hospital in London, where neutrons were generated by Medical Research Council's 60-inch cyclotron with 6 MV neutrons. Because of the limitations associated with low-energy cyclotrons, interest at several centers in the United States turned to the use of large cyclotrons that accelerated neutrons to energies of 22 to 50 million electron volts. Radiobiological properties of neutrons were superior to photons at experimental levels. For example, the neutrons are particulate radiation. Neutrons have moderate linear energy transfer. RB of neutrons higher than photons. For induction of biological effect, low oxygen effect is needed for neutrons, and no dose wasting fractionation occurs when we use neutrons in fractionated regimens compared to the dose waste we use with photons. For using high energy neutrons, different sources are available. We have cyclotrons. We can use radioisotopes, for example, natural californium-252, or another source of radioisotope, americium beryllium source. But these sources are not very useful for in clinical setting. For using high energy neutrons at clinical setting, neutron generators were invented. In these generators, neutrons were accelerated and targeted to deuterium, tritium, or beryllium targets to producing single energy neutrons. The most popular of these generators are neutron tritium, which produces neutrons with 14 million electron volt energies. However, neutron therapy experience was not successful because of PLD damage in normal tissue are not able to repair after neutron therapy. Therefore, the side effect of neutron is high, and with the use of neutron, we have no therapeutic gain factor. PNC, another use of neutron for cancer treatment. The basic idea behind neutron boron capture therapy, bombardment of boron with thermal neutrons, effect of neutron itself plus alpha particles generated by interaction of neutron with boron in situ lead to a considerable killing effect of tumor cells. However, there are still limitations with this method. We do not have a magic drug that can distinguish malignant cells from normal cells, and the low energy neutrons necessary for BNCT are poorly penetrating in tissues and consequently result in percentage depth doses to the tumor and poor safety by today's standard. This procedure was not successful till now. Proton therapy is used for cancer treatment at several centers. Use of protons for radiotherapy was proposed as early as 1946 based on their superior physical dose distribution. Their radiobiologic properties are remarkable. The RB of protons is indistinguishable from that of 250 kV X-rays, which means that they are about 10% more effective than megavoltage X-rays generated by a linear accelerator. The OER for protons also is indistinguishable from that for X-rays, namely about 2.5 to 3. These biological properties are consistent with the physical characteristics of high energy proton beams. They are sparsely ionizing except for a very short region at the end of the particles range just before they stop. These are advantage of protons for the same dose to the target volume. Protons deliver a lower absorbed dose to normal tissues than do high energy X-rays. There is no clinical advantage to be gained by irradiating normal tissue that do not harbor malignant cell. There is little difference in the radiobiologic properties of protons used for therapy and high energy X-rays. This includes repair, OER, and response through the cell cycle. The only relevant difference, therefore, is the dose distribution. The clinical proton facilities in the United States have agreed to use an RB of 1.1 for protons relative to high energy X-ray. Ionizing radiation examine normal tissue as well as tumors, with the severity of the damage increasing with the dose. This slide shows the black peak at the end of the particle range, proton range. We see that the main energy is imparted at the end of the particle range to cover the energy released in black peak area to the tumor size. The black peak should be broadened to cover the tumor area and tumor size. Interest in heavy ion therapy centered initially at Berkeley, California, where in the 1970s, heavy ions, including carbon ions, differ from both protons and high energy X-rays in their radiobiological properties on account for their higher LET. The rapid change of RBE with depth toward the end of the range of a carbon ion beam is its advantage over protons or photons. These are properties of carbon ions for heavy ion beam therapy. The LET stays low in the entrance plateau or normal tissue, allowing repair to take place as with X-rays, whereas the RBE is maximum coincides with the Bragg peak. The Bragg peak is produced by carbon ion should also be broadened to cover the whole tumor area. Carbon ions are relatively stable and have a small nuclear fragmentation tail beyond the Bragg peak. Compared with protons, carbon ions have less lateral scattering, leading to sharper beam edges. These figures show that carbon ions are superior to protons for tumor treatment. In summary, additional technology development is required to close the gap to advanced proton therapy technique or photon therapy techniques. Major efforts should be directed toward more compact and less expensive technology. Major promise include better dose localization, already with helium, and higher biological effectiveness. In neoradiobiology should be further explored, leading to a reduction of the metastatic incidence of or burden, in particular with hypofractionated high LET radiation. Ion therapy has come to a long way and warrants further investigation. Thank you very much for your kind patience and attention to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hossein Mozdarani. It was a wonderful talk and very informative. So we have few questions, but I think it should be okay to have them at the last of the program so that we have a good discussion with all the three speakers. So now we have, as our last speaker, we have Dr. Mary Joan with us. So let me introduce her for you. So Dr. Mary Joan is an associate professor of radiation physics and she's a RSO for the Department of Radiation Oncology, Christian Medical College Hospital, Ludhiana. She has a teaching experience at doctoral, postdoctoral, and undergraduate levels of medical education. She is a peer reviewer for 5 international journals and 1 international newsletter. Also an co-editor-in-chief for SCM PCR newsletter from Bangladesh. She has worked on 5 research projects. She has 29 publications. She has already delivered 70 presentations, including 34 invited talk. She's been awarded with 6 awards, 2 travel grants, 2 Best Paper awards, and 5 Best Paper nominations. She has attended 78 conferences and is member to 8 professional bodies, now holding 3 leadership positions in professional bodies, and already completed 4 professional certificate courses. So we welcome Dr. Mary Joan and request her to proceed with the presentation. Ma'am.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, yes. Please go
Thank you. I would like to thank the organizers and Professor Chougule and Professor Mozdarani for giving me this opportunity to be part of this AFOMP school. And a warm good afternoon from Christian Medical College, Ludhiana, India, to all the participants attending. We are going to discuss about the radiobiological rationale of radiation protection. The NCRP has come up with the division of radiation background from medical exposures as well as background exposures. We can see that the sources and the radiation units like the radon and thoron sources, it gives rise to 2.28 millisievert, and computed tomography, which is a major chunk of the radiation exposure, gives rise to 1.47 millisievert, and The radiation exposure from the nuclear medicine procedures comes up to 0.77 millisievert, and interventional fluoroscopy 0.43 millisievert, and space cosmic radiations 0.33 millisievert, and conventional radiography and fluoroscopy again 0.33 millisievert, and internal terrestrial consumer exposures 0.029, 0.021, and 0.13 millisieverts, and occupational exposures contribute to 0.005 millisievert of the total radiation exposure. And different sources of radiation in life. There are multiple applications of radiations in life. All aspects of life, we have some uses of radiation. The natural radiation sources and the annual natural background radiation from the food, drinks, radon gas, cosmic rays, and building materials. Those comes up to 2.4, and the man-made radiation sources majorly for the medical uses of radiation, and the annual dose limit for occupational workers is said to be 20 millisievert per year, where we all know recently that the average effective dose from a CT scan, chest CT scan, is 6.6, and annual dose limit for general public, that is except for medical exposures which they need to undergo for diagnosing or treatment of their ailments, it is 1 millisievert per year. And Professor Mozdarani has also explained in his slides, there are vast applications of ionizing radiations in different fields of life. So the medicine being the most widely used, radiations are used in imaging, in radiology, in nuclear medicine, and in therapy for external radiotherapy, for using cobalt-60 radionuclides, or the X-rays produced electronically like in LINAC, and then internal radiotherapy like brachytherapy, and in nuclear medicine also the radioiodine treatment and other radionuclide treatments. And industry also has many applications like nuclear power plant where the energy is produced, and for industrial radiography, and fuel processing, food industry, where radiations are used for irradiation of agricultural products to increase its shelf life. And then for research, labeling, tracing, X-ray diffraction, and molecular imaging studies. Apart from all these benefits, the other side, on the other side of the coin, we have, since the radiation is a double-edged sword, it induces injury also from external irradiation or contamination with radioactive material, or if the radioactive material got incorporated into body cells, tissues, or organs. And the severity of the injury, the higher the dose, the more severe the early effects, and greater the possibility of delayed effects. So here are some images of the radiation injuries: erythema or redness of the skin, epilation, various degrees of skin burns. We have seen this from the history. And early observations of the effects of ionizing radiation, like the first skin burn reporting happened in 1896, within a year of the discovery of X-rays. And simultaneously, the radiation X-rays were used for treatment of cancer. And in 1896, Becquerel discovered radioactivity. And the first cases of skin damage were reported in 1897. And the first report of X-ray induced cancer happened in 1902. And in 1911, first report of leukemia in humans and lung cancer from occupational exposure. And in the same year, 94 cases of tumor reported in Germany, and out of that 50 being radiologists. Looking into this, I would like to go in detail of two of the incidences. The Kasabian invented the positioning device that displayed the ribs as round rather than flat on X-ray images. He wrote the influential textbooks on electrotherapeutics and radiology. He is the one who first published paper discussing the side effects of radiation, he being the one experienced it on first hand. and he sustained radiation burns to his hands, had 2 fingers amputated, and developed skin cancer within a few years and spread across his body, leading to his death at age of 39. Here we can see in the first image, which was taken in 1909, and the next one, the year when he died. And this is another image of his hands with radiation burns and fingers amputated, which we are very familiar with. There is another example of Sister Blandina. She started her work as a radiographer in Cologne, held nervous patients and children with unprotected hands, and even controlled the degree of hardness of the X-ray tube by placing her hands behind the screen. And after 6 months, strong flushing and swelling of hands happened, diagnosed with X-ray cancer. Some fingers were amputated at first, then whole hand amputated, which further led to whole arm amputation. And 1915, severe difficulties of breathing and extensive shadow on the left side of her thorax, large wound on her whole front and back side, and she died on 22nd October 1916. And here is the picture of a monument honoring the pioneers who died victims of their exposure to radiations before 1935. So we know that the hazardous effects of radiation were not well known. They were under experimenting or studying those, and the radiation protection and shielding concepts were not in place, but their services benefited the humankind much. And in this context, Madame Marie Curie's words, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. And now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less." That is why this signifies the importance of understanding the pros and cons of radiation, its benefits, as well as difficulties in handling it. Coming to the quantities and units of radiation measurement, we know the exposure, which is measured in Roentgen. The SI unit is coulomb per kilogram in air. And we have dose, which is the absorbed dose, measured in rad or gray. And the equivalent dose is absorbed dose multiplied by radiation weighting factor, which is measured in rem or sievert. And equivalent dose multiplied by the tissue weighting factor, which is measured in rem or sievert. We know all radiations, same amount of all radiations will not result in same radiological effects. So the radiation weighting factors and different tissues respond differently to the same radiation. So different tissue weighting factors are also applied. And the dose equivalent and effective dose are the protection quantities. So the ICRP 60 and ICRP 103 has given the values for various weighing factors of radiation as well as tissue. Here we can see the weighing factors remain same in both. Radiation weighing factors remain same in both ICRP 60 and ICRP 103, other than for neutrons, where it was a step function in the ICRP 60 report, and in ICRP 103, a continuous curve is recommended and adopted. And we can see the various tissue weighing factors recommended by ICRP 60 and ICRP 103. The major difference being the breast tissue weighing factor was increased from 0.05 to 0.12, and the gonads, ovaries and testes, the weighing factor was reduced from 0.20 to 0.08. Dose limitations for occupational exposures based on radiobiological studies, like from the time of invention, the extensive use and studies were happening, and until 1900s, the dose limit was erythema dose. And 1902, fogging of radiographic film was suggested by Rollins, and film badges came into picture for the first time. And 1920s to 1940, the tolerance doses came into picture. And in 1925, the 40 rem per year dose limits has come into picture. This was 1/10 of erythema dose. And in 1931, again, it is approximately 40 rem per year. That IX RPC recommendations came into picture. Then 1936, it has brought down to 20 rem per year. And in 1959, NCRP came up with 5 rem per year accumulated dose. And in 87, 5 rem per year accumulated dose and age rem came into picture. And in 1991 onwards, 2 rem per year recommended by ICRP. So in more familiar terms, like today we have 20 millisievert per year for workers and 1 millisievert per year for members of the public, which is continued to be the same. And coming to the recommendation, radiation protection recommendation, the aim and scope of radiation protection recommendations are to ensure appropriate level of protection for people, approximate models for protection of human beings and environment, tissue reactions and deterministic effects are prevented, cancer and hereditary effects minimized, and protection of the environment. And the evolution of protection standards were based on unconditional death probability not to exceed 1 in 1,000 per year. And the detriment or the length of life lost due to exposure to radiation. It is the mean loss of life expectancy at age 18 years is 0.5 years for an average annual effective dose of 20 millisievert. The fundamentals of radiation protection are justification, optimization, and dose limit. Any exposure should be justifiable, and the risk versus benefit comparison and the benefit should outweigh the risk from the application of the exposure. And the optimization is based on ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable. This could be achieved by means of the fundamental principles of time, distance, and shielding. The less time we spend with radiation, the lesser the dose. The more distance stay away from the source, the radiation dose will be less. For example, if the person is at 1 meter and 40 mR per hour is the exposure levels, and if the distance is increased to 2 meters, the distance is double, the exposure levels will become 1/4, that is 10 mR per hour. And judicious and appropriate use of shielding will help in reducing the doses. And the dose limits, we know the annual dose limits for radiation professionals 20 millisievert per year, and 5-year dose limit of nuclear radiological workers of 100 millisievert, and annual public dose limit is 1 millisievert. And protection of pregnant women, ascertainment of pregnancy before treatment, sensitivity of conceptures, risk associated with diagnosis versus benefit to be assessed, pregnant women to be informed about the risk, radioiodine therapy contraindicated, radiotherapy possible for cancers in remote sites, absorbed doses greater than 100 milligrade to be to the conceptures for termination of pregnancy. This after careful consideration and consultation. The radiation professionals, the treating physicians, the patient all needs to sit down and discuss the benefits as well as the risk, and the patient has to be given the freedom to take an informed decision. Coming to the learnings on biological effects since ICRP 1990. So deterministic effects are now described as late and early tissue reactions, chronic radiation syndrome, hematopoietic immune system 0.3 to 0.5 gray per year, and neural systems are sensitive. No severe reactions for annual doses below 100 milligray. Induction of cataract appeared to be more than expected both in atomic bomb survivors and children treated for hemangioma. In radiation carcinogenesis, which involves initiation, promotion, malignant conversion, and tumor progression, radiation primarily acts as an initiator and has limited role in promotion. So the ICRP 118 publication, which came out in 2012, redefined the dose limits. The occupational dose limits to the whole body remains 20 millisievert per year. The lens of the eye, which was 115 millisievert, brought down to 20 millisievert. And hands and other extremities remain same to be 500 millisievert. And the public exposure limits remain same, 1 millisievert. And medical exposures does not come under the dose limits. The justification of medical procedures and optimization of protection should be strictly adhered to ensure the patient safety. Radiobiological effects of ionizing radiation can be classified as somatic effects and genetic effects. Somatic effects are those which happen on the exposed individual, and genetic effects are those effects which happen in the progeny of the exposed individual. We all are familiar with stochastic and deterministic effects. Stochastic effect, there is no threshold dose. The severity of the effect increases with dose, and leukemia and genetic effects are examples. And induction of cancer, initiation, promotion, commitment and malignancy are stochastic effects, stochastic in nature. And in deterministic effect, there is a threshold dose. The probability of the threshold, the effect occurs, and the severity of the disease increases with the dose. Examples are cataract, sterility, skin injuries, epilation, etc. Deterministic effects has a threshold effect, threshold dose, and it is non-stochastic in nature. Existence of a dose threshold value means below this threshold, the effect is not observable, and severity of the effect increases with dose. A large number of cells are involved in for the expression of the deterministic effects. And threshold doses for deterministic effects: for permanent sterility in females and males, up to 6 gray exposure leads to permanent sterility. And lens 0.5 to 2.4 gray, we may be able to detect opacities in the eye lens. And visual impairment or cataract happens at around 5 gray. But there are differences when the radiation dose is protracted exposure. Similarly, how like when we treat a patient with a fractionated radiation scheme, or a radiation professional is working for over a period of time, then the dose limits are 5 gray and 8 gray. And bone marrow depression, it is 0.5 gray. For the genetic risk evaluation, the risk per unit dose is calculated by multiplying natural incidence, doubling dose, mutation component, and potential recoverability correction factor. Doubling dose is the dose required to induce the same amount of genetic damages as that of natural incidence. So it can be expressed as the ratio of average spontaneous rate of mutations at a set of gene loci to average rate of induced mutations at the same set of loci. So that is MS by MI. Based on 135 genes underlying 26 autosomal dominant diseases, the spontaneous rate is 2.93 plus or minus 0.64 into 10 raised to minus 6 per gene per generation. Based on mouse data on induced mutations pertaining to 32 genes, an average estimate is 3.5 plus or minus 0.9 into 10 raised to minus 6 per locus per gray. The estimated doubling dose is 0.84 plus or minus 0.31 gray. The mutation component, the doubling dose alpha by beta, the total spontaneous expressions and the slope are alpha and beta. The delta M is the increase in mutation rate relative to the spontaneous rate of mutations. So the spontaneous rate mutations to the increase in the mutation rate will give us the doubling dose, and the reciprocal of the doubling dose is relative mutation risk. Lower the doubling dose, higher will be the relative mutation risk. Since doubling dose is the ratio, its variation depends on spontaneous or induced mutation rates or both. Measure of how disease rates change when mutation rates change, that we can understand from the mutation component. And autosomal dominant, it's a straightforward 0.3. Autosomal recessive, it is slightly complex. And multifactorial diseases, very complex, approximately 0.01 to 0.02. And the potential recoverability correction factor, assuming that the genes which underlie in causing disease included in the P, the general occurrence, will be respond to induced mutations. Radiation induced mutations like deletions may not be compatible with live births and may lead to natural elimination by abortions and stillbirth. So the PRCF is a fraction and hence reduces the overall risk. Unweighted PRCF is 0.3 and incidence weighted PRCF is 0.15. So the genetic risk estimates given by the ICRP 60 is 0.6% per sievert for working population and 1% per sievert for general public. And in ICRP 103, it is 0.1% per sievert for working population and 0.2% per sievert for public. The system of radiological protection is based on the type of exposure situations, categories of exposures, identification of exposed individuals. The exposure situations can be classified into planned, emergency, and existing exposure situations. And categories of exposures can be occupational exposure, public exposure, and medical exposure. And the identification of exposed individuals, the workers, the radiation professionals, and members of the public, patients, and comforters. So coming to the radiation limits, radiation safety limits to the occupational exposure and public exposure. For planned exposure situations, there is for occupational exposure, there is dose limits and dose constraints. Same applies for public exposure of planned exposure situations where there are dose limits and constraints. And for medical exposures, diagnostic reference levels are suggested. And for emergency exposures, for occupational exposure or public exposure, it is the reference levels. And existing exposure, it is reference levels in both cases of occupational as well as public exposure. So the medical exposure of emergency exposures, the long-term recovery operations should be treated as part of planned occupational exposure for the rescue workers. Coming to the in utero exposure, no serious effects for less than 100 milligray, IQ loss of 25 points per sievert, 30 points per sievert in ICRP 103 report. Induction of severe mental retardation has a threshold of 300 milligray. In utero, irradiation risks are similar to that among those exposed in childhood. A better understanding of the mechanism of mental retardation is highly necessary. Acute radiation effects following whole body exposures, less than 100 milligray, not detectable. Elevated risk of stochastic effect is there. 0.1 to 1 gray, no clinical manifestation of damage detectable by chromosomal aberration analysis. 1 to 2 gray, radiation sickness, NBD syndromes. 2 to 6 gray, hematopoietic syndrome, and LD50-60 for humans are 4 gray. 8 to 15 gray, GI syndrome, pneumonitis, damage to individual organs takes place. More than 25 gray, CNS syndromes. Significance of different levels of radiation exposure at high doses. So 1 gray acute whole body radiation exposure is the threshold dose for radiation sickness. 1 gray to the reproductive system, dose which induces the same number of mutations as spontaneous induction, which is also the doubling dose, dose which causes temporary sterility in males. And 3 gray acute whole body dose is threshold for epilation, threshold for induction of cataract, radiation sickness in most individuals exposed, early erythema induction, leukopenia, death of a small percentage of individual, 10 to 30%. 3 to 5 gray acute whole body exposure, LD 50-60 for human beings, severe leukopenia, purpura, hemorrhage, infection, and depilation, which are reversible. And 6 gray X-rays, permanent sterility in both male and females exposed, threshold for skin erythema. Whole body exposure results in death of more than 90% of the individuals, even with the best care. And 6 gray of gamma, partial body or localized exposures, threshold dose for skin erythema causes permanent loss of hair. 10 gray skin exposure is threshold dose for dry desquamation. 10 gray dose to the lungs, threshold for fatal pneumonitis. 10 gray to the intestines, severe GI syndrome, likely to be fatal. 20 gray skin dose, threshold for wet desquamation. 20 gray whole body exposure, gastrointestinal syndrome and death within 2 weeks. 30 gray localized exposure, ulceration and dermal necrosis. 30 gray exposure to the whole body, CNS syndrome and death within 2 days. So 40 gray localized to the tumor. This is the radiation. 40 to 60 gray localized to the tumor is the total radiation dose used in fractionated radiotherapy of cancer. So time course of manifestation of these effects: early erythema within few hours, NVD syndrome 1 to 24 hours, decrease in lymphocyte counts 2 to 3 hours, 3 days, radiation burns 5 to 7 days, decrease in granulocytes 4 to 5 weeks, skin erythema 2 to 3 weeks, depilation 2 to 3 weeks, death by GI syndrome 1 to 2 weeks, maximum decrease in RBC and platelets 3 to 4 weeks, hematopoietic death can happen in 1 to 2 months, temporary sterility males 2 months for onset, pneumonitis 3 to 4 months, kidney damage 6 to 18 months, cataract 2 to 3 years on an average, leukemia peak incidence 5 to 7 years, thyroid cancers 5 to 15 years, other cancers 10 to 40 years or later, late effects years to decades, and genetic effect happens in the future generations. Professor Chougule and Professor Mozdarani has explained in their slides the biological process of radiation effects. In a nutshell, the physical changes, the energy absorption, ionization, it takes place in 10 raised to minus 16 seconds. And the physicochemical changes, interaction of ions with molecules, formation of free radicals happens in 10 raised to minus 6 seconds. And chemical changes, interaction of free radicals with molecules, cells, and DNA happens in 6 seconds. Biological changes, cell death, change in genetic data in cell, and mutations, it happens in tens of minutes to years. So the basic interaction pattern, the direct action of and indirect action of the radiation in a cell or the genetic material. In the direct action, the photon photon interacts with the molecules, and then the electrons which will directly target the DNA strand and damage it, while the photon releases electron, it interacts with the water molecules, and then the H and OH ions and free radicals are created. They in turn interact with the DNA molecule, causing damage. They are called indirect action. As the cell is composed of 80% water, the ultimate result of radiation interaction with water molecule is the formation of an ion pair and free radicals. Free radicals, unpaired electrons in their outer shell, a state which confers a high degree of reactivity. So H2O on interaction with radiation gives rise to HOH plus electrons. This free electrons interacts with H2O, giving rise to HOH minus, and HOH plus will give rise to H plus and OH minus, OH dot, OH free radical and hydrogen ion, and HOH minus give rise to OH ion and H free radical. So the ion pairs H plus and OH minus and free radicals H dot and OH dot are created. This were also explained in detail by the previous speakers, the different types of damages caused by these free radicals, OH minus, OH dot being the most aggressive one. There can be base alterations, absence of the base being removed from its original position, single strand breaks, double strand breaks, and different mechanisms of repair. And if the cell is able to repair, then it can be a viable cell. If the damage is such that the cell cannot be repaired, leading to cell death, it becomes an unviable cell, and cell survives, but the different mutations are happened, which can be a cause for the cancer initiation. Coming to the radiosensitivity, probability of a cell, tissue, or organ of suffering an effect per unit of dose. And Bergoni and Tribondieu in 1906 came up with the radiosensitivity laws. As the radiosensitivity will be greater if the cell is highly mitotic, is undifferentiated, and if it is having a long mitotic future. So the different radiosensitivity levels and different types of cells, nerve cells and muscle cells have low radiosensitivity. Osteoblasts and endothelial fibroblasts and spermatids have intermediate radiosensitivity, and spermatogonia, lymphocytes, stem cells, interstitial mucosa, erythroblasts are highly radiosensitive. And factors affecting radiosensitivity, physical factors, LET, linear energy transfer. This was also, all these factors are discussed very well in detail, the fundamental basic scientific principles of radiobiology. And dose rate, chemical factors, increased radiosensitivity, oxygen and cytotoxic drugs, decreased radiosensitivity using sulfur, cysteamine, etc. And biological factors like cell cycle, increased radiosensitivity for G2 and M phase and decreased radiosensitivity for S phase. Repair of damage or sublethal damage may be repaired, like when we do the fractionation of the dose, the shoulder becomes more predominant, and there are different the high LET radiation doses are more effective in compared to bringing maximum damage in comparison to protons and X-rays. Linear energy transfer. I'm not going into the details, detailed explanations, as it is already covered by the previous speakers. To summarize in a nutshell, LET is the energy transferred per unit length of the track. The special unit is keV per micrometer. X-rays and gamma rays are low LET radiations. Alpha and fast neutrons are high LET radiations. LET directly related to ionization and therefore biological damage. Here are the list of different types of radiations and their corresponding LET values. Photons of cobalt 60, it is 0.3, 200 keV X-rays, it is 2.5. Electrons of 1 MeV 0.2, 100 keV 0.5, 10 keV to 1 keV 10, charged particle, proton of 2 MeV 17, alpha particles of 5 MeV 90, carbon of 100 MeV 160. Neutrons of 2.5 MeV, 15 to 80, and 14.1 MeV, 3 to 30. Oxygen enhancement ratio. This is also the fundamental principles are explained by Professor Chougule and Professor Mozdarani. The presence of molecular oxygen dramatically influences the biological effect of X-rays. This is to produce these effects, oxygen must be present during the radiation exposure or at least at the lifetime of the free radical. And from the graph, we can see the OER for X-rays is about 3 at high doses and is possibly lower below 2 gray. What happens is the indirect damage which happened in the presence of oxygen, it gets fixed. The damage gets fixed or the damage becomes permanent in the presence of oxygen. And relative radiobiological effectiveness, it is equals the dose of different types of radiation do not produce equal biological effects. Like 1 gray of neutron produces a greater biological effect than 1 gray of X-rays. High LET results in high RBE, and it is similar to the quality factor. So RBE is dose of 250 kV X-ray to produce the same effect divided by dose of test radiation to produce the same effect. In RBE, the point is the biological endpoint or the effect of radiation is constant, not the doses. From here, we can see 100 kV per micrometer X-rays having the most efficient, being the most efficient, having the maximum relative biological effectiveness, having the ionization incidences created at the double strand size. And over, as the ionization incidences are more, the overkill happens or the wastage of energy happens. There are chemical countermeasures for radiation effects or radiation syndrome. An ideal chemical countermeasure should be able to protect against both acute and chronic radiation damages, rapid absorption and distribution throughout the body, no significant toxic side effects, and should be readily available and inexpensive, chemically stable for easy handling, transport, and storage for field use. DNA exposed with X-rays, X or gamma rays, endogenic or exogenic radiation protection compounds and protects the DNA. The exposed DNA in the presence of oxygen becomes more vulnerable, making the oxygen a radiosensitizing agent. And other radiosensitizing agents, oxygen mimetic radiosensitizers and other chemical factors, exposed DNA gets attached with the sensitizer, making it more susceptible to the radiation. These are the radiation protectors are prophylactic agents prior to exposure, minimize cellular or molecular damage. The dose reduction factor, DRF, is the ratio of radiation doses required to produce the same biological effect in the presence and absence of radioprotector. So effectiveness of the radioprotectors decreases with increasing LET. Best available agents have dose reduction factors of about 2.5 to 3. So these agents helps in radioprotection by free radical scavenging, hydrogen atom donation, etc., facilitates direct chemical repair at sites of DNA damage. The examples are cysteine. They are toxic and induces nausea and vomiting at doses required for radioprotection. And sulfhydryl group, when covered with phosphate group, toxicity reduced and protective effect enhanced. Radiation mitigators. Shortly after irradiation, prior to manifestation of normal tissue toxicity to reduce severity of radiation response. So there are multiple examples, multiple drugs which are available in the market. Neupogen, Neulasta, Sargramostim, etc. And the supportive care is also important in the form of cytokines, blood products, antibiotics, antidiarrheals, fluids, and electrolytes. And radiation therapeutics are the agents given after overt symptoms appear in order to simulate repair or regeneration. Sucralfate, benzodiazepine hydrochloride are examples. And in addition to those, dietary supplements like Boma and Berg inhibitor and other antioxidants can be given. And radionuclide eliminators are those discorporate or block absorption of internalized radionuclides. Examples are potassium iodide in order to prevent radioactive iodine from getting absorbed and stored the radioactive potassium non-radioactive potassium iodide tablets are given prior or after the event of the accident, so that the thyroid gland is saturated with the non-radioactive iodine and further absorption of the radioactive iodine does not happen. And Persian blue or radiogardase, which contains ferric hexacyanoferrate, which will help in replacing cesium isotopes, radioactive cesium isotopes. Then DTPA, diethylene triamine pentacetic acid, helps in removing heavy metal poisoning, plutonium, americium, thorium, etc. So to conclude, the more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in battle. And I would like to acknowledge all the members of the Department of Radiation Oncology, Christian Medical College and Hospital for their encouragement and support. And thank you all for kind, patient listening.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for such an informative and interesting talk. So now I may request Dr. Hossein Mozdarani and Dr. Arun Chougule to join us for the discussion. Dr. Hossein. Dr. Hossein, can you hear us? Dr. Hossein? I think...
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, it will be nice if we can see your video.
Yes.
I request all other participants to please switch off their mics and their videos so that we can have a good and live discussion and need not to worry about the bandwidth. So I think Professor Chougule will join us soon. Before that, should we start with the discussion?
Yes.
Okay. So we have some questions. So first of them is somebody wants to know something related to radiobiological effectiveness in case of change of plan from 2 gray per fraction to 3 to 4 gray per fraction for the same total prescribed dose. Should I repeat the question, sir? Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us, sir? Dr. Hossein, can you hear us?
Hello. Can
Hello?
you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Now
Yes.
now we can hear. Should I repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Yes. Participants wants to know about the biological effectiveness in case of change of plan from 2 gray per fraction to 4 gray per fraction for the same prescribed dose.
Well, it depends on the normal tissue. that it is the effect is reparable or not at high doses. It depends on the radiosensitivity of the tissue, both tumor and normal tissue, because normal tissue is always a limiting factor for increasing doses when per fraction.
Okay. So the same participant has asked one more question. She wants to know something about treatment gap corrections.
For fractionation, the timing is very important, and it depends on the tumor cell cycle time. For example, if the cell cycle time is 24 hours, if we deliver the next dose after 24 hours, we lose everything. We lose repopulation, we lose radiosensitivity, we produce, of course, give the tumor cells to repair more, such as normal tissue. Therefore, the effect of the first fractionated dose will be eliminated. Therefore, the timing in fractionated regimen is very important, and it is very important also we know the cell cycle time of the tumor cells.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. We have one more question. The participant wants to know further whether change in treatment energy from 15 MV photon to 6 MV photon make a difference in biological effectiveness?
From 50 MV photon to 60 MV photons, when we increase the photon energy, we increase the photon penetration. It may spare the normal tissue more than 50, because the LET will become lower for normal tissues, and we will have the energy impartation in the tumor itself. I think the higher MV will be better for normal tissue complications.
Okay. One more question. So they wants to know something about hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Well, hyperbaric oxygen usage was used at many years ago, when the oxygen effect was introduced and realized. But it was not a very successful way, because it was not tolerable for patients, because they had to put the patients in high pressure oxygen chambers, which was very dangerous for patients. And because oxygen is very flammable, and it harms patients. And in the other hand, they used to for peritoneum, they used hyperbaric oxygen as liquid and injected in the peritoneal peritoneum of the patients for inducing hypoxic cells to be reoxygenated, but also it was not very useful, and it was not successful.
Okay, I agree, sir, with that. So before coming to the next question, I want to inform all the participants that the link for the certificate is available in the chat box, which can be used to fill or for the requesting certificate. So please note that if you want to have the certificate. So the next question is, can you please explain the dose loss due to the delay in brachytherapy in CA cervix cases due to EBRT and brachytherapy treatment? like when we do treat CA cervix cases, we have combination of two kinds of treatment. Some part is given with teletherapy and some part is given with brachytherapy. So the participant wants to know if there is a delay, then what is the dose loss due to that delay?
I think Professor Chougule should answer this question because it's not my expertise in brachytherapy.
Okay. So we'll wait till Professor Chougule join us, and we can move to another question, and we can take it at the last. So the another question is from CS Sureka. She wants to know, she first congratulated that the presentation was very nice, and she wants to have your inputs regarding the potential research area in radiation biology.
Well, potential research in radiation biology is very extensive, but now for precision radiotherapy and for prediction of radiotherapy outcome, radiogenomics is very radiogenomics is very interesting, and there are many scientists and researchers doing radiogenomics to predict radiotherapy outcome and the tumor normal tissue toxicity after radiation therapy.
Okay, thanks, sir. Now we have another question from Azam Janati. He wants to ask why the annual permissible dose of radiation worker is 20 times of that of ordinary people.
Well, I think Dr. Joan can answer this question.
Yes, sir. So the
Yes.
annual dose limit for radiation worker is set at 20 millisievert, or we can say that it is the chance of one person developing radiation hazard if 1,000 people are exposed to radiation of 20 millisievert. And the public exposures are kept at much lesser, like 1/20th of the occupational workers, because if the whole population get exposed to 20 millisievert, that will lead to a very much higher doses of cumulative population doses, which may be dangerous for the protection of the mankind as well as for the protection of the environment. Also, the radiation workers are trained people who know about the radiation, its side effects, how to protect themselves, and public are not so. So in order to ensure the safety of the population, it is kept at 1 millisievert again.
Okay.
Yes, may I add one point? The difference is not 20 times, it's 10 times. The general population the annual dose is 1.6 to 2 millisievert, and for radiation workers is 20 millisievert. It means that the difference is 10 times. Another thing I can add to Dr. John's comments is that we can monitor radiation workers with their personal monitoring devices, but we cannot do this for all the population. We cannot give the all population to have film badge or TLD monitoring or other monitoring devices. This is one. And another thing might be that we have shown experimentally, it was the radio adaptation we can see for radiation workers. We have shown that radiation workers who receive the annual doses less than limits, less than 20 millisievert, they can tolerate higher doses, 2 gray and 4 gray, more than normal healthy people, not non-radiation workers.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir and ma'am. And now we have another question. So the question is regarding re-irradiation geometric sparing factor dependency and repairing effect. Means I think the person, the Azad Zamir, wants to know something about re-irradiation, wants to have few comments over re-irradiation, geometric sparing factor dependency, and the repairing effects.
Yes, re-irradiation is very complicated issue because each tissue or organ has its limitation for re-irradiation. Therefore, the repair of normal tissue may be complicated in re-irradiation courses. And it is very difficult to explain, really.
So it's from my side. Sometimes the patient come with some reoccurrences, and then we have to re-irradiate the patient, and then we
Yes.
have to decide whether we should go for that re-irradiation and what should be the dose we should go for. So is there any kind of a guideline which we can go through for that kind of decisions?
Well, there are guidelines for some cancers, but not for every cancer. We have guidelines. Professor Chougule may explain more about this question.
So actually, we have a question from Azad Zamir. He wants to have some comments over re-irradiation, a matter of re-irradiation and geometric sparing factor dependency and the repairing effect, which is quite prevalent in clinical cases, as sometimes the patient come with the reoccurrences and then we have to irradiate the patient again. Then we have to decide can we re-irradiate the patient, or what kind of the doses we can go for re-irradiation.
Is it question
Should
for
I
me?
repeat the...
Yes, it is for you.
Okay, yeah. Just you can see that the ERD or BED with time constant we have seen. So the gap correction you can apply, and what is the gap correction is with the gamma over alpha. Say gap is for 1 year, 365 days. Then almost you can say 80% of the dose can be repeated. And the patient is coming after 2 years or 3 years. Depending upon the circumstances, you can repeat the entire dose in the area where you are treated earlier. So with the gamma or alpha, that is the decay of the ERD or BED over the time, you can use those factors and calculate that what is the effective ERD. Say, for example, you have given a complete dose and your ERD is 72, and the patient comes after a gap of maybe 365 days, then actually the remaining ERD effect will be hardly of 8 to 10 ERD or bed. So almost you can give the entire dose with the same dose fractionation or modified dose fractionation to give the remaining or effective ERD or BED. So you can apply the decay of the bed and then you can use those. Hello?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. I think this would definitely help us. We have one more question, sir, which we have reserved for you. So the question is, the Pawan Kumar Singh wants to have a quick comment about, he wants explanation regarding the dose loss due to the delay in brachytherapy, CS cervix cases during the EBRT and brachytherapy treatments.
Yeah. Now, again, you can see it that cancer cervix, actually the repopulation starts after 4 weeks of your treatment. Now, if you are given a teletherapy, external beam therapy, for example, 3 weeks, and there is a gap of 1 or 2 weeks for giving the brachytherapy, then no correction will be required. But if the gap is more than 3 weeks, then you have to correct for T minus TK, because the repopulation will start Generally, it starts at the 3 weeks, end of the 3 weeks, or 4 weeks for the cancer cervix. For breast, it's almost about 50 to 60 days. For prostate, is about 80 to 100 days. And therefore, during the COVID also, same kind of papers have come that if you're going to treat a breast cancer, then the gap of even 6 or 7 weeks is not going to affect your final outcome. And for prostate cancer, even 8 to 10 weeks gap is not going to affect. But fastly growing or repopulation where it starts 3 to 4 weeks, like head and neck cancer or cancer cervix, if there's a gap of more than 4 weeks, you have to correct for the repopulation constant using the formula of T minus Tk gamma or alpha.
Thank you so much, sir. We have one more question from Asad Zamir. He wants to know how we calculate the value of K and mu, I guess.
Yeah. See, mu is actually repopulation constant, and generally it is taken by actually log T over T half, and it comes out to be 0.46 or 0.69 if the doubling time, what is a doubling time depending upon, and these values are given in literature either 0.46 or 0.69 mu.
So now we have another question from Professor Sizekazu Fukuda. So first of all, he has thank you all for nice lectures. And then he wants to ask, when we consider about biological effect, it is important to take SLDR and PLDR into consideration. However, SLDR and PLDR are conceptual. So what is the reality of SLDR and PLDR?
Again, that is again a debated this thing, because you have to get from your, see all the models which gives you the guidance, but ultimately your decisions are taken from the clinical experience and the clinical outcome and the day-to-day reality. Because just these parameters, because for every situation, every kind of tissue, every kind of effect, the alpha by beta, gamma or alpha, the mu are very different. And selecting these values is very, very critical. And therefore, they can give you some rough guidelines. But ultimately, again, it is your clinical judgment when you apply into clinics. The exact values you have to, for your kind of patient, your kind of protocols, you have to estimate your own values. Though there are literature values are given, still then you need to validate these things in your clinic, your results and your outcomes.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Again, we have some questions from Asad Zamir. He wants to know something about the re-irradiation. So I think we have already addressed the issue of re-irradiation. So now we move on to the last question of the day, and that is, what is the tolerance of OAR if we are treating post-MRM cases with hypofractionation of 50 gray in 5 fraction? Is it beneficial over normal dose fractionation or not?
See, for the mostly for the breast cancer, which is a slowly growing tumor, and where alpha by beta for tumor are of the order of 4 to 5, and the late reaction alpha by beta is of the order of 2 to 3. Here, a moderate hypofractionation is used. And now he has asked OAR critical values. Kind of OAR, the values will be different. If it's a spinal cord, value will be different. If it is optic chiasma, it will be different. It is a mucosal reaction, it will be different. It's a proctitis, it will be different. What OAR, the tissue kind of tissue involved, that you are going to take depending upon the limits will be there.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Thank you everyone for such a wonderful and
There
informative
there
session.
is one question about radiobiology of TBI.
Again, you see in total body irradiation. Now, if you see various kind of tissues and various kind of sensitive organs you are getting into, isn't it? To be on the safer side, you take actually the red bone marrow, very highly sensitive. And here, very difficult to calculate the ERD or something for entire whole body.
For what?
Hossein, want to add something?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's very difficult because the heterogeneous kind of sensitivity of the tissue involved in TBI. So you have to take the most sensitive, most critical organ, and then the dose limitation will be according to that.
I hope we have covered all the questions now. So thank you very much, all the speakers. It was a very informative session and very interesting one also. And it was a very lively and good discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. So now I have a few more information to share with you
So
all.
before that, let me thank Professor Hossein Mozdarani and Dr. Mary Joan for immediately agreeing for this AFOMP school. When Jin asked me, I depend upon these two my colleagues, and they immediately agreed, and that is how today's AFOMP school webinar has happened. I'm sorry because we immediately had a AGM and I was not able to spare time because I was on the dais with AGM. So that was the thing. So thank you very much.
I also thank you for giving me this chance to be with you. And I thank Dr. Verma for moderating this session, and also Dr. Joan for providing very nice presentation.
So thank you all. It was a pleasure to have you all with us. So the certificate link is already posted on the chat box. All the participants can use that link. And if you have any queries related to certificate, please feel free to write Dr. Mary Joan, Chair PRC, for any further information. The video of this recorded video of this webinar will be available on website, and it will definitely be shared with the social handles of AFOMP on Twitter and LinkedIn India. So you can also visit there. So our next AFOMP monthly webinar will be on 6th of April by Dr. Eva Bezak. It will be on the review of cumulative doses from radiobiological imaging and the risk of cancer in children and young adults. I hope you all join us for that program. So thank you very much for being with us and making this program a success. So at last, I thank all of you to be with us, and of course to Dr. Hossein Mozdarani and the whole team. So see you all on 6th of April.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay
See you.
safe.
Bye.